the dense jungles of Vietnam throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, a hidden and insidious enemy lurked, waiting to claim the lives of unsuspecting soldiers amidst the brutality and chaos of the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army employed a terrifying array of booby traps designed to demoralize, maim, and kill those who dared to venture into their territory. These deadly devices came to define the conflict that still haunts the memories of so many. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, and the traps of the Vietnam War exemplified this philosophy, sowing fear and uncertainty amongst the troops and forcing them to confront an enemy that was as invisible as it was deadly. Join us as we venture into the treacherous battlegrounds of the Vietnam War, exploring the sinister world of booby traps that instilled terror in the hearts of soldiers. The Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics during the Vietnam War were characterized by their cunning and effective methods, outmaneuvering their enemies in the dense jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam. The Viet Cong developed a complex and highly effective strategy to counter the superior firepower and resources of the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Their success was based on their ability to blend in with the local population, utilize the natural terrain to their advantage, and rely heavily on the element of surprise in their battle strategy. One of the key elements of Viet Cong tactics was the establishment of a vast network of underground tunnels, such as the Tu Chi tunnels near Ho Chi Minh City. These tunnels allowed the Viet Cong to move undetected, evade enemy forces, and served as living quarters, storage spaces, and even hospitals for the guerrillas. The Cu Chi tunnels are now a popular tourist destination, showcasing the resourcefulness and tenacity of the Viet Cong fighters. However, their most iconic tactic was their use of traps, ingenious devices designed to maim, kill, or demoralize enemy troops. These devious traps struck fear into the hearts of soldiers and were remarkably effective, causing countless injuries and hampering the movement of troops. As General Von Nguyen Giap, the mastermind behind many successful campaigns, famously said, "We will fight the enemy with our cunning and make them die in their anger," encapsulating the Viet Cong's determination to use their resourcefulness to overcome the odds. In addition to Pungi stick traps, the Viet Cong employed a variety of other inventive methods to inflict damage on their opponents. The psychological aspect of the Viet Cong's tactics cannot be understated. They sought to instill fear in their enemies by using poisonous animals like snakes and scorpions in their traps and even tampering with food and water supplies. Their goal was to make enemy soldiers constantly question their safety and undermine their morale, ultimately breaking their will to fight. Unraveling the secrets of the Cu Chi tunnels, a sprawling network of underground passageways spanning more than 250 kilometers, played a critical role in the Viet Cong's guerrilla warfare during the Vietnam War. Built between the late 1940s and 1960s, these tunnels provided a hidden base for the Viet Cong to launch surprise attacks, move supplies, and evade capture. Life in the Cu Chi tunnels was far from easy. Despite these challenges, the tunnels were equipped with various facilities that allowed the guerrillas to live and work underground for extended periods. These subterranean spaces included sleeping quarters, meeting rooms, kitchens, and even makeshift hospitals where the wounded could receive treatment. The Cu Chi tunnels were not discovered by American and South Vietnamese forces until the early 1960s. Once they realized the significance of these subterranean networks, a concerted effort was made to locate and destroy them. This led to the formation of specialized units known as tunnel rats, small, agile soldiers who volunteered to crawl into the narrow, dark passageways to search for enemy combatants and dismantle booby traps. Despite the efforts of tunnel rats and other military forces, the Cu Chi tunnels continued to be a formidable challenge for U.S. and South Vietnamese troops. The Viet Cong's knowledge of the tunnels and their ability to navigate them with ease allowed them to launch ambushes and then disappear without a trace, leaving the enemy forces feeling frustrated and demoralized as they struggled to adapt to this unfamiliar terrain and style of warfare. The use of punji sticks by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War is a prime example of how simple, locally sourced materials could be transformed into deadly weapons. These traps were designed to cause severe injuries and spread fear among enemy troops, demonstrating the resourcefulness and cunning of the Viet Cong fighters. Punji stick traps were typically deployed in areas where U.S. and South Vietnamese forces were likely to travel or seek cover, such as along jungle trails or near riverbanks. They could also be found around the entrances of the Cu Chi tunnels to deter and injure those who attempted to infiltrate the underground network. In order to maximize the damage inflicted by punji sticks, the Viet Cong often coated the tips with harmful substances such as venom from poisonous plants or human and animal excrement. This added a further layer of danger, as even minor puncture wounds could lead to serious infections and complications. The use of punji sticks dates back to the First Indochina War, when Vietnamese guerrillas employed similar tactics against French colonial forces. However, it was during the Vietnam War that these traps became infamous, as the Viet Cong refined their design and deployment to maximize their impact on the enemy. One famous account of a punji stick encounter comes from U.S. Marine Private First Class Frank Harbert, who had the misfortune of stepping on a punji stick trap while on patrol in 1968. He recalled, "I felt a sharp pain in my foot, and before I knew it, I was on the ground screaming in agony." Harbert's injury, while not life-threatening, took him out of the fight and required weeks of recovery. The psychological impact of punji stick traps on enemy forces cannot be understated. The constant threat of stumbling upon these hidden hazards made soldiers anxious and less focused on their surroundings. As a result, their morale suffered, and they became more susceptible to making mistakes. U.S. and South Vietnamese forces took several measures to counter the threat of punji sticks. They developed specialized footwear with reinforced soles to protect against puncture wounds, and often sent scouts ahead of the main force to probe the ground for hidden traps. The widespread use of booby traps and landmines took a heavy toll on U.S. and South Vietnamese forces, both in terms of casualties and morale. Stories of soldiers losing limbs or their lives to these hidden dangers spread fear and unease throughout the ranks. In response to this threat posed by booby traps and landmines, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces developed various countermeasures. They employed minesweepers and specialized equipment to detect and disarm these devices. They also trained soldiers to recognize and avoid common booby trap locations. Additionally, they conducted extensive aerial reconnaissance missions to identify enemy minefields. The Viet Cong's use of net traps demonstrated their resourcefulness, as these simple yet effective devices allowed them to incapacitate and demoralize U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Net traps were designed to ensnare enemy troops and lift them into the air, rendering them helpless and vulnerable. These traps consisted of a large net, often camouflaged with foliage, which would be spread across the ground and secured with a series of stakes. When an unsuspecting soldier stepped on the net, a concealed rope would be triggered, pulling the net tight and lifting the soldier off the ground. Falling traps were designed to cause enemy troops to fall into hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes or other hazards. These traps were often disguised as natural depressions or covered with a thin layer of foliage, making them difficult to detect. One infamous example occurred during Operation Attleboro in 1966, when a U.S. soldier named Sergeant Michael O'Brien was patrolling with his squad when he suddenly found himself lifted into the air by a net trap. He later recalled, "It happened so fast that I didn't even know what hit me. One moment I was walking, and the next I was hanging from a tree." Falling traps were designed to take advantage of terrain features such as slopes or hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes or other hazards. These traps took a heavy toll on U.S. and South Vietnamese forces, both in terms of casualties and morale. Stories of soldiers losing limbs or their lives to these hidden dangers spread fear throughout enemy ranks. The psychological aspect of these traps cannot be understated. They sought to instill fear in their enemies by using poisonous animals like snakes and scorpions in their traps. These creatures were placed in hidden compartments in booby traps or even soldiers' sleeping areas where their venomous bites could incapacitate or kill. In addition to utilizing venomous creatures, poisoning food supplies also targeted basic necessities, creating an atmosphere of constant vigilance and distrust. The use of wire traps stands as one of the most insidious methods employed by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War, turning battlefield into a house of horrors with traps like snap traps designed to inflict sudden severe injuries, as well as slide traps that caused victims to lose footing, resulting in severe injuries or death. As U.S. military forces grappled with these threats, they realized necessity, developing countermeasures, protect troops, mitigate physical impact, hidden dangers. Through innovation adaptation, they devised various methods, tools, disable, prevent Viet Cong traps, turning tide conflict, saving countless lives. In conclusion, we are reminded profound impact these cunning tactics had on those who served. By sharing personal stories, veterans who encountered threats firsthand, we can gain deeper understanding impact these tactics had lives those who served. The stories we have shared today are testament courage. Those who faced fears face unknown, navigating world fraught invisible threats. As we reflect lessons, legacies, Vietnam War may never forget sacrifice, valor, men, women who confronted hidden dangers, persevered through adversity.